thanks you all to being here. Today we have our third webinar of this year. Today we have a special guest, Viola Corradini from MIT. And we thank her for being here and accepting our invitation. Thank you, Viola.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Can I share my screen?
Oh, just 1 minute. I'm going to present you. Viola Corradini is a PhD candidate in economics at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Her research is in the fields of education and labor economics, with a particular interest for how institutions in labor and education markets shape racial and gender inequality. Okay. And before Viola starts her presentation, I would like to remember that the call for papers for the fourth meeting, Brazilian meeting on family and gender economics, it's open. Please send your papers, do your submissions. You have until April the 2nd. You can enter the GFA website, gfa.com.br, and do your submission. So Viola, now the floor is yours. Thank you for being here again.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to present our paper, Collective Bargaining for Women, How Unions Can Create Female-Friendly Jobs. This is joint work with Lorenzo Lagos, who is an assistant professor at Brown University, and Garima Sharma, who's a fellow PhD student with me at MIT. So I don't think I need to motivate to you our paper with the fact that we still observe persisting gender gaps in labor markets across the world today. And while women's labor supply choices face additional constraints, both coming from biological demands for those who choose to have children, but also social demands and gender norms, unfriendly workplaces might exacerbate the trade-offs women face. Think, for instance, about the recent debate about working from home or flexibility in the workplace. Perhaps if firms were able to provide more of these valuable amenities, then women would be able to invest in their careers more. So why aren't workplaces better designed for women? One view is that it's too expensive to provide additional flexibility, additional, say, maternity leaves or childcare allowances. It would come at the expense of employment or wages. Another view instead is that perhaps women preferences are not prioritized when setting the wage and amenities compensations, when in decision making. So perhaps collective bargaining could shift how workplace policies are set. And this is, after all, unions' jobs to constrain employers' discretion in setting the wage and amenity compensation bundle. And so a shift in union objectives and union priorities could create female-friendly jobs. This is precisely what we're asking in this paper. So we ask whether prioritizing women preferences could make workplaces more female-friendly, and if so, at what cost? We studied this in Brazil because it's a great setting for us for two reasons. The first is that collective bargaining is very important. It features prominently in the workplace. It covers about 50% of the formal sector workers. And the second reason is that we have really good data that allows us to answer our question, because we can link collective bargaining agreement coverage to the HISH data, which is a data set that tracks workers across jobs and across employers. In addition, we can study the effect of a reform in 2015 that we use as a source of experimental variation. The CUT is the Central Única dos Trabalhadores. You can correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Is the largest union central in Brazil. And in 2015, it made women a centerpiece of its agenda, of its bargaining agenda. And I will explain in a second how we are going to study this reform and what this reform is about. This paper has three parts. In the first part, we want to measure what it is that women value in this in the workplace amenities. What are female-friendly amenities? And we do so with a novel revealed preference approach that essentially combines data on worker flows with our data on collective bargaining agreements. In the second part, which is the main part of the paper, instead we try to answer our main question of whether prioritizing women's preferences changes the workplace. And to preview the result, the answer is yes. We find a disproportionate gain for women in the collective bargaining agreements, but also in real labor market outcomes after the union put women's needs front and center. We find evidence that these changes are valued by women, and we actually don't find clear trade-offs in terms of employment, wages, or with some caveats, and that I will explain more later on, profits. The third part of the paper tries to quantify how these changes in the workplace translate into changes in welfare. And we find we do this with the help of a structural model. I'm not sure we'll have the time to go into this part, but to preview the results, we find small improvements in women's welfare that don't come at the expense of men's welfare. So even if you're more familiar probably than the typical American audience with the institutional setting, I will just give you some details about institutional features of collective bargaining in Brazil that are useful to understand what we do. There's two types of collective bargaining agreements in Brazil. One is a sectoral level that happens between one or more unions and an employer association that represents the interests of a group of firms. And these sectoral level contracts typically set wage floors for the sector. On top of these sector level contracts, there are firm level agreements. These are negotiated between typically one union and one firm, and they cover a subset of workers. It's about 14% of formal workers. And you can imagine that these firm level agreements are negotiated with large employers. They're much larger than the typical firm size in Brazil. And they are the main source of fringe benefits, so additional amenities, additional benefits on top of the sector level wage floors. Another important feature is that workers are assigned a union that represents their interests. So they don't get to pick the union that represents their interests, but they're assigned one based on the category and geography cell. So for instance, if you're a metal worker working in Sao Paulo, you are represented by the metal worker unions of Sao Paulo. Coverage is universal, so regardless of membership, and employers don't get to opt out of collective bargaining. Union priorities and union leaders play a central role in the negotiation process. They typically write a list of demands called the pauta to be voted by a general assembly of members, and then they bring this list of demands to the negotiation table. The union landscape is very fragmented. There's about 11,000 unions, but these unions can affiliate to one of 9 large union centrals, which you're probably familiar with. They don't directly engage in collective bargaining. The union centrals don't directly bargain with employers, but they coordinate the activities of the affiliated unions. For instance, they organize the strikes, or they try to steer the attention towards certain themes. The largest is the CUT. About 1 in 4, 1 in 5 unions is affiliated to the CUT. And as you might know, it's considered more left-wing leaning. It has affiliation to the PT, to the Partido dos Trabalhadores. So it's considered more like a progressive union central. We use 3, and it's like, I will talk in a second about this like reform that in 2015 that happened within the CUT. We use 3 main data sources. The first is Sistema Mediador. It's an online registry of all the collective bargaining agreements starting in 2009. A nice feature about this data set, it is that it already classifies the clauses included in the contracts into one of 137 types, which we use as a basis to measure these amenities, the amenities that are provided in the contracts. So I'll give you an example of what a clause looks like. This is a clause that is categorized under the group maternity leave. It extends maternity leave duration by 60 days on top of the 120 days that is like the floor. It offers jobs protection after the woman comes back from maternity, and it extends the protection to adoptive mothers. The second source of data is HICE, or HICE is how you pronounce HICE. It's an employer-employee linked data set that covers the universe of the formal sector. So we observe information about the establishment, industry, location. We observe information about the entire trajectories of workers' careers, also their demographics, their wages, whether they take maternity leave, and for how long. And we are able to link HICE with Sistema Mediador through the establishment identifiers. The third source of data is the National Registry of Unions that allows us to see the gender composition of the union boards and their affiliation to the Union Central. So whether they're affiliated to the CUCH or to another Union Central, which is what we use to assign treatment status to the unions. So in the first part of the paper, as I said, we try to measure what female-friendly amenities are in this contract. And we do so in two ways. The first is intuitive. So we read the list of 137 clause types that are in Sistema Mediador, and we pick 20 types that we intuitively think, also based on the literature, are things that women value. And these are things that fit 4 themes. Leaves, for instance, following maternity or adoption. The second theme is maternity and childcare allowances, so extra payments for childcare, job protection after maternity. The third theme is workplace harassment and discrimination, so related to moral sexual harassments and equal opportunity promotions. And finally, clauses related to flexibility and part-time work. However, because we handpicked these 20 themes, we also want to use a completely data-driven approach to classify what it is the women value in this contract. The idea here is to select the collective bargaining agreements clauses that mostly correlate with women's value of working in an establishment relative to men. So the first step in this process is to measure the desire of women and men of working at an establishment, the utility they get from working at an establishment. And we do so using Sorkin's PageRank algorithm that is based on the idea that basically we use movements of workers from an employer to another employer, based on the idea that if an establishment sees a lot of inflows from other highly valued establishments, that establishment, by a revealed preference argument, must be very good, people must like a lot working there. And similarly, if an establishment sees a lot of outflows to other establishments, it means that establishment is not really good. It's not very valued by a lot. So with this idea in mind, we measure women and men's utility from working at establishment J. And then we think that the utility from working at an establishment depends on the wage compensation that establishment gives to your gender group and the amenities provided by that establishment. So we regress the relative, so the women relative to men valuation of working at the establishment J on women and men AKM fixed effects, which are a proxy of wage premia at establishment J, and then a measure of amenities of type Z. So remember, we have 137 types of amenities offered by that establishment. And we use an average clause count over the years we observe. Because we have many regressors, 137, we use Lasso to pick the ones that are most predictive of this relative valuation of women for working at an establishment J. And then we identified as female-centric the clauses with the highest betas, so those that are most positively correlated with women's valuation of working at that establishment, and as male-centric, the clauses that have the lowest beta, so the most negatively correlated with women's value of working at an establishment. Actually, let me show you directly what we find in the table. So in the first column, we have our intuitive handpicked clauses that we think is what women value. In the second column is what Lasso picks as the top 20 female clauses and the top 20 male clauses in the third column. And in red, we highlight the overlap between the data-driven method and our intuitive method. And what you see is that there's a big overlap with the data-driven female clauses, almost no overlap with the male clauses, as we would expect, which means that it's working well. And essentially what the data-driven method picks up for women is that women value clauses related to leaves and family care, whereas men seem to value things related to additional pay and workplace safety. Like if you see this list of men clauses, there's a lot of like on-call pay, life insurance, profit sharing, salary deductions, but also things related to injured workers, machine and equipment maintenance. To check that this data-driven method selects things that make sense, we plot the average number of clauses provided by an establishment. So in red, the male clauses, and in brown, the female clauses, by the share of women working at that establishment. And what you can see is that the number of male-centric clauses provided in the agreements of establishments is decreasing in the share of women working at that establishment, whereas the number of female-centric clauses is increasing only when women become the majority at that establishment. The gap between the two is almost closing, essentially, when women are a majority of workers at that establishment, whereas when women are a minority of the workforce, there's a large gap between the male and the female-centric clauses. So we think that this data-driven method is actually picking up something that makes sense. And perhaps when women become the majority, they are better able to advocate for these amenities, to ask for these amenities, or perhaps it's the firm that needs a lot of women and to attract them is providing all these female clauses.
Viola,
Okay.
Can I ask you something?
Absolutely.
Is there something about paternity leave on
yes,
men's side?
there was. One of the 137 types was paternity leave. But actually, it's not something we included in the intuitive. I don't remember if it was picked up. Actually, it doesn't seem like it was picked up by the data-driven method. I don't see it.
Okay, and the maternity leave or
yes,
extension or protections. Okay.
They're always, so we put them both in the intuitive definition, but also the data-driven method, the lasso, picked up precisely these things: maternity protection, abortion protections, adoption leave, policy for dependents, childcare assistance was the most correlated with this, like a relative valuation of working at the establishment.
And the extension of the maternity leave.
The extension, it's probably maternity. So
leave.
This is what, maternity leave is what we handpicked, but it's not among the, it's a predictive exercise. So it's not among these, it wasn't picked up by Lasso, but other things were.
And top 20 male clauses, nothing about that.
There's nothing about, maternity,
Or paternity leave,
Or paternity either. No, but paternity leave was one of the types. It was one of the regressors. It was just not picked up in the Lasso as the most correlated. Okay, so in the second part of the paper, now that we have a measure, we can measure in these contracts what it is that women and men also value. We can try to answer our main question, which is whether prioritizing women in collective bargaining changes their workplace. And to do so, we studied the effect of the Couch reform of 2015. So this reform had two parts. First, it entailed an introduction of a 50% gender quota in the Couch national and state level executive boards. Here, I'm plotting the share of women in the national board of Couch in brown, and in the other union centrals in red. And as you can see, the reform had a bite. So in 2015, the share of women in the national board of Couch increased to 50%. This was just a quota. And there was almost no effect in the other union centrals. It was decided in the 2012 National Congress of the Couch, but it was then, it was put in place with the next election cycle in 2015. Even if the reform did not impose a quota on the boards of the unions affiliated to the CUCH, we still find some positive spillovers to the gender composition of local union leadership. These are small. This is like a diff in diff coefficient. And the effect is like essentially 1 percentage point increase in the share of women in the boards of the local union affiliated to the CUCH, off of a baseline of about 26 percentage points. The second part of the reform was the adoption of a female-centric fight plan. So this newly elected board of the CUCH wrote this basically book of resolutions where they try to push for things in the collective bargaining, for things such as extending maternity leaves, childcare benefits, workplace flexible workplace schedules. They also tried to encourage their affiliated unions to include more women in leadership positions and in drafting the list of claims to bring to the negotiation table. So we see this reform in 2015 as a good source of a quasi-experiment that is essentially a top-down shift in the priorities of the CUCH-affiliated union leaders that is uncorrelated with labor demand, firm shocks, or worker preferences for working at certain firms. So we study the effect of this reform with the difference in differences design. We study outcomes of treated firms and workers, and we compare them with untreated firms and workers, whereby treated firms and workers, I mean firms that negotiate with unions affiliated to the CUCH or workers represented by unions affiliated to the CUCH. Okay, the first thing the first set of results we look at is whether the collective bargaining agreements become more female-centric. So we look at the text, the clauses included in the collective bargaining agreements. Here on the left, we have an event study plot using the share of female clauses in an agreement. And on the right, we have the share of male clauses in the collective bargaining agreements. And as you can see, in contracts negotiated by unions affiliated to the CUCH, we observe a 2 percentage point increase from a baseline of 7%, so a 30% increase in the share of female clauses, and a small decrease, about a 2% decrease in the share of male-centric clauses in these contracts. If we use, instead of the share, an intensive margin measure, so the number of clauses, we observe very similar things for the female. So for female, about a 20% increase. Almost no effect until 2016 for the number of male clauses. Then we have this weird jump of 5% in the number of male clauses. But if we look at the share, because this is driven by the fact that there's more, total number of clauses in 2017 agreements is increasing. But again, if we look at the share, it's clear that there's a shift in the composition of clauses in the contracts of CUCH affiliated unions. This table essentially summarizes what I already shown you in the event study pictures. It's just showing you the pooled diff coefficients. The first 5 columns use the intuitive definition rather than the data-driven definition, because this allows us to see that the increase is actually driven by clauses related to leaves and maternity, and less by harassment and flexibility. And the takeaway, again, is that the composition of collective bargaining agreement becomes more female-oriented and perhaps slightly less male-oriented, as I showed you before. Where are these gains concentrated? Where are they coming from? They are essentially entirely coming from places where women lacked representation at baseline. So here, this table shows you the triple interaction between essentially the treatment indicator, the post indicator, and the heterogeneity dimension we look at. In the first column, we look at heterogeneity according to whether the establishment had a low share of women in the workforce. In the third column, we look at whether the union negotiating the contract had the low share of women in the board at baseline. And in the fourth column, we look at heterogeneity according to whether the union did or did not have a woman president at baseline, so in 2014. And as you can see, the interaction is always positive and essentially driving entirely the pooled effect, showing that all the gains are coming from firms where women were a minority of the workforce, or where women were not very much represented in the union board, or in firms where the union did not have a woman as a president to begin with. So far, we've just looked at contracts, so changes on paper. It doesn't mean that collective bargaining agreements then change things in practice, right? So, but luckily we have the highest data, so we can look at real labor market outcomes. We identified some outcomes that we think might have been changed by collective bargaining. So we look at the share of women among managers, which could correspond to clauses related to equal opportunity in promotions. We look at the share of women taking an extended maternity leave or returning to the same employer after maternity. And because we observed that men valued workplace safety, we also looked at the share of workers taking injury leave. We find a positive effect of about 2% in the share of women among managers, and about a 14% increase in the share of women taking an extended maternity leave, so above 120 days in treated firms relative to untreated firms after the reform, but no effect on the probability of returning to the same employer after the maternity leave. So we could interpret this either negatively in the sense that perhaps job protection clauses did not have any effect, or perhaps positively because even though these women are taking longer maternity leaves, they're not more likely to lose their jobs after they come back. And there's no meaningful deterioration in workplace safety, even though we saw this that small decrease in the share of male-centric clauses in the contracts. There's evidence that women seem to value these changes, and this evidence comes from retention rates. So here we are plotting the event study on retention rates, comparing women in childbearing ages, so between 20 and 35 years old. Actually, this is a triple diff. So women relative to men, treated relative to untreated establishments before, after the reform. And we see that these women are 1 percentage point more likely to remain at their employer after the reform. The retention rate at baseline is about 70%. So it's a small increase. It's a 1 percentage point off of a baseline of 70%. So it's not huge, but it's significant. We also find a 1 percentage point increase in the share of women working at treated establishments relative to untreated establishments. So we interpret these changes as a revealed preference, evidence that women like to stay at these establishments more now. We also find some evidence, I'm not showing it here, of what we call job queues, in the sense that the share of workers, of probationary workers, so workers who have tenure less than 3 months at these firms, so the share of women among these new hires is increasing. And perhaps we interpret this as perhaps more women are applying for these jobs because we observe them, basically there's more new hires, but then they're not more likely to be retained. Then after we present all these changes in the contracts and we say, well, there's actually some changes also in real labor market outcomes, the first question we get is, well, but something must give in. There must be some trade-offs. Either firms are cutting employment or they're cutting wages. Where is this coming from? So we try to see whether there are trade-offs in employment, but we actually didn't find any. So here in the first column, I'm showing just like the definitive effect on total employment, and we find nothing. If anything, we find a small increase, as I showed you before, in the share of women working at treated establishment, which is, as I showed you before, driven by the retention rates that are more likely to stay. The incumbent women are more likely to stay. We also find no decrease in wages of women nor of men. We are able to rule out very small wage decreases. We also find no impact in the contract. So if we look at the clauses in the collective bargaining agreements that negotiate wage adjustments, and we extract them from the text and we look at a different effect on them, we find no decrease in the wage adjustments negotiated in the contracts either. The caveat is that we don't observe profits. We just observe whether a firm exits from the market. And along this margin, we don't find any effect. It's possible that firms' profits decrease, even if we don't observe them. We observe profits for a small subset of firms using Orbis data. And on this very small subset, we don't find any effect. But again, this is the only caveat that we are not able to rule out, right? That even if there's no employment and wage cuts, perhaps firms are paying more, and so their profits are decreasing. Men don't seem to be worse off. So they're not more likely to quit. They're not less likely to apply. It seems that they don't start hating these workplaces after these changes. Essentially, what we have shown is that a top-down decision to prioritize women's needs led to female-friendly jobs, both in the contract, so on paper, but also in practice. And representation of women at baseline matters because all the gains were concentrated in places where women's voices probably were not heard before. And these changes seem to be valued by women who are more likely to stay at these employers now. This doesn't seem to be at the expense of any other margin in terms of like employment or wages. And then in the paper, we use a structural model to quantify the welfare changes associated to these changes in the workplace, finding about a 3% improvement in women's welfare and essentially no change in men's welfare. So to conclude, we show in this paper that perhaps one reason why workplaces are not designed better for women is that decision makers do not prioritize women's preferences when designing labor market institutions, when designing the type of wages and amenities to provide, and that when they start doing that, female-friendly jobs are feasible without clear losses, with the caveat that we don't observe profits. So just like past evidence has shown that political leaders, their identity and their priority changed policy. Think, for instance, about all the papers on gender quotas in municipal boards or in the parliament. Then the same thing could happen in the labor market. So the priorities of union leaders or firm leaders or decision makers then can shape labor market inequality and within firm inequality. So perhaps if there's any policy takeaway to take from our paper is that institutional priorities can benefit or hurt underrepresented group, and at least in our context, we find that raising the voices of these groups can uncover efficiency gains, because what we find is essentially a Pareto improvement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Oh, that's nice. The result that is Pareto improvement, I think, is the more important thing.
Yeah, we always, people are always puzzled by this, and we're also puzzled in the sense that it's hard to explain. You know, like economists don't like when there's a free lunch. I feel like you always have to explain it somehow with like, oh, but it must be that then, you know, I don't know, something must give in. They're either cutting the wages or they're not hiring women anymore. But this is not what we observe. Perhaps maybe profits are, you know, there's a slight reduction in profits, but we cannot observe this. So it's hard to tell.
Oh, but I think it's, I think the result is, I don't think for if an environment is better for women, it's gonna be worse for men.
Yeah, no, this for sure. In fact, we don't find that they're more likely to quit, to go away.
Yes.
To, yeah. But then, yeah, I guess like what people find puzzling is that there's evidence that they're providing longer maternity leaves, and this is probably costly to the firm. And yet they don't stop hiring women, or they're not penalizing women for this, which, I mean, yeah.
But part of the maternity leave is paid by the government, not by the firm. But okay, I will ask. Yara has a question, so
yes,
please, Yara.
Hi, Viola. Nice paper. Thanks for the presentation. Just one question about these gains, the cost of this policy. Do you look at productive gains? Because maybe the employers are not quitting the women in the job, but maybe there is productive gains because the women and the men working in the firm are more happy now. So maybe that's happy now.
So absolutely. So one thing we would need to look at productivity gains is profits, right? And we don't have that to the extent that, so, I mean, the classic labor market model would tell you, wages equal to productivity, but we know it's not true. And especially in this context of collective bargaining. So the fact that we don't observe an increase in wages doesn't tell us, I don't think tells us much about productivity either. But retention rates, for instance, there's evidence that, a higher turnover is costly for the firm. So the fact that women are quitting less, it's probably also better for the firm. As you're saying, this might be a productivity gain already, the fact that there's a higher retention rate. Unfortunately, we cannot quantify it in the sense that we don't observe profits. But I agree. One explanation could be these people are happier now. They stay more, so the turnover cost is lower and they're more productive. And so perhaps that's why there's no costs in terms of wages or employment.
Other thing, how is because you're looking for the effect, and how much is the time you have data before because maybe it's a long-term thing that maybe in the short term people are staying in the firm, but in the long term there will be turnover.
Absolutely. So the reform happened in 2015, and unfortunately we only have data until the end of 2017. So we have 3 years of post-reform, like 2015, 2016, 2017. And this is very unfortunate. And we tried so hard to renew our contract with the Ministry of Labor, but they never responded. So because we wanted the more recent highs, but they never responded. We sent a lot of emails. And so unfortunately, we cannot observe longer term effects, which would be great also to observe, for instance, maternity leaves, or like child penalties. But we don't have enough data afterwards.
Understand. Thank you.
Anybody? Anybody? Somebody? You know, Viola, they are not answering anyone.
Okay, good to know that it's not just me. Okay.
No, it's unbelievable.
Okay. And we asked a friend who speaks in Portuguese, of course, because we didn't, and she sent the email. She's from Brazil, but they never responded. We sent a few, 5 emails. We thought that maybe with this change in administration, things would be different. Who knows? I don't know.
I don't know.
Since there is no one, can I make another question?
Absolutely, yeah.
Go
ahead.
When you show you thought that the results were when the firms have less than 50% of women in the workforce, right? But can you see if these effects change by the more different shares, because I understand that you only saw that more than 50%, less than 50%, but maybe these results are driven by firms that have a share that is very close to 50%, and what was lacking was this changing
So
oh my
yeah, so essentially this is exactly what I think what you're asking. So here we're like if you focus on the right panel, so in brown we have the definitive effect on the share of female clauses, and in red on the share of male clauses. And as you see, the largest effects are actually in establishments where women are between 0 and 19% or 20 and 40%. There's some effect around the 50%, but really like these gains are here in firms where the share of women was really low.
Oh, I missed it, this graph.
No, because I didn't present it because I thought I didn't have time. So I just did the above and below the median. But so yeah, I just did essentially this like above and below, which is what you said. That's why but I had it in the backup slides.
Thank you.
Anna, do you want to ask a question?
It's two questions, comments, like congrats to your paper and presentations, really, really good. One thing that when I read your paper, it's a mistake of mine. Like I never, and I study about gender economy, but it was new, this reform to me, you know, like and the impact that it caused to this, and it's huge, like this Cucci unit, it's huge, and the impact that this reform caused to the preference you show in the paper, that was great, at least for the preferences, and it has impact to efficiency and like welfare, like but strictly to gender, like one thing, like I missed in the paper, some more details about this reform, you know, and how was before and after, you know, like just to know how was the effect from, and I know that it's not a evaluation impact, but are you following me? You know, like just to know. And the other thing is how this we can relate with gender inequality with the main labor market outcomes, you know, like it's another paper, I'm sure, like it's another paper, but like your paper is really good, and it raised me like several questions, you know, like this. So just I'm just thinking loudly here. And
no, I so in terms of how does, maybe we didn't do much on other more classic gender inequality measures. Well, first of all, because we don't find any decrease in the wage gap. So we don't find that this changed anything in wages, no? And so maybe that's why we didn't focus on that much. We focus on where we found the effects, which is essentially, perhaps they weren't transformative. Like we found a lot of effects on the contract, on this like change in the clauses provided in the contract, and then some effects in labor market outcomes, mainly the maternity leaves extensions. But we didn't really find any effects on the gender wage gap, for instance. And so that's why we didn't put all that focus on gender inequality in the classic sense because of that. But I agree that perhaps we could have done more to describe, like for instance, I thought that, you know, this graph already, like showing that there's like a large gap in the male amenities and the female amenities that shrinks with the share of women in the establishment was, I mean, descriptively interesting, and perhaps a dimension of inequality with these amenities that people haven't really focused much in the gender economics literature, right? We always think about wages or whether you arrive to a managerial position and promotions, but also amenities matter in the workplace environment. So perhaps I agree, maybe we could have done more in describing this.
Like the main result, the main point is that the preferences of women preferences, you can prove, you show that as women preferences change, like the whole thing can change.
Exactly. When
that's the new and that the creativeness of this paper that I like it so much, because we always study gender inequality with this typical labor market result, and we assume that the preferences is stable, or like a institutional structural that women.
It cannot be changed in any way.
Yes,
it's given, you have to take, or it's very slow to change. Whereas here we showed that it's not that slow actually. It's No, I agree. But I agree, maybe we should have done more. And in terms of the institutional context around the reform, I didn't talk much about it in this paper, but essentially I also didn't know. So I read, I tried to translate from Portuguese all these documents where essentially union leaders there are these documents where especially women within the CUT were trying to advocate for a push to move towards gender parity. And this came, after the PT introduced also a gender quota, I think in 2011. Within so it was kind of a spillover from the political environment to the unions, activists, essentially.
Okay. Can I ask you a question about, did you do some heterogeneity between the different sectors?
No, we never did that actually. But if you have some, because we didn't know whether that would have been interesting, but if you have some ideas of where and why you think, I don't know.
I will try maybe financial institutions. I think the employees they are really connected to unions. There's a strong maybe they are more
Unionized.
This unionized.
It's we talked also, we spoke on the phone, on Zoom with the leader of the banks. I think it was the bank union of Sao Paulo. She's a woman. She was really helpful also in helping understand the context. And she talked extensively about all these campaigns they did in to essentially introduce protections for female workers who suffered from domestic abuse, and adding leaves and special types of job protections for these type of workers. So she seemed very, I don't know, she seemed to suggest that I agree that the banking sector, the banking industry was,
yes, and maybe,
yes.
Yes, it's the first that come to my mind. And the second is educational sector.
Yeah.
A lot of female employees.
We are excluding the public sector from the analysis because we just wanted to focus on the private. But it's true that, I would assume that in Brazil, most of the education sector is public or not. Do you also have private?
No, has private.
And then some might be in here.
Most of are public, but we have some private. Yes, maybe okay. It's smaller than the public, but maybe you can try. I think it's the the sectors that come to my mind.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
you're welcome. Any more questions? Are there any more questions? No?
I only have a very brief comment, is that if you are running all these regressions with different outcomes, maybe you should think about doing some Romano-Wolf adjustments for p-values. So you can show that your results are robust to trying to
multiple, yeah.
Yes.
That's yeah, we didn't do that.
It's only that.
Thank you.
Okay. Anna?
Just another one, really brief comment, like that will improve your arguments in the conclusion. Like you are in the other side of the arguments of Golding 2014 about like you mentioned her,
Yeah,
in the introduction of the like because she argues that like when the labor demand changed, the firms changed the structures of everything about amenities, the women go more like will participate more in the labor market. Like in this case, in your case, like it's the offer, it's the supply side, you know, like you could mention this in the conclusion, like just
that's right. Yeah.
yeah. Just occurs to me.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for all your comments and feedback.
Oh, thank you for being here. Thank you, Viola, for your amazing work. Very interesting, and about Brazil. Thank you all for being here, and see you next week in our on Friday, next webinar, next week, not in 2 weeks, exceptionally. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thank you, Viola, very much. Thank you. Bye bye.